Moving in, one hand on the stick, rolls it in front of shot. They score! Another one for the Anaheim Ducks. 3 quick ones. Chris Wagner was there in front of the net. Beat Price. Wow, 5-2 Anaheim.
3, 2, 1. Hello. Welcome to a new edition of Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. It's Saturday night or Saturday evening or wherever it is that you are. It's Saturday. That's the important thing. Thank you for hanging out with us here. We've got 2 hours to go until game time Saturday night here on Hockey Night. It is going to be the Battle of Ontario on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. We've got that game coming up for you just after 7 o'clock, so stay tuned for that, and we'll have plenty on the Leafs, and we'll tee up this game in particular during the course of the show today. But the highlight you just heard from Habsland, the Montreal Canadiens, how low can you go? And if there's one thing I've learned about this as a sports fan, is that you should never think that your team, your favorite team, has hit rock bottom, because they will continue to go deeper and deeper and get worse and worse than you ever thought possible. It'll keep happening. What are we, 8 games into the season? I mean, look, we got 74 games to go, and things could and very well might get quite a lot worse, or maybe they'll figure it out. They've literally just gotten through the most difficult stretch of schedule that they have all season long, and Laura Saba, the producer here of Hockey Primetime, knows. I mean, they got a lot of shots on goal in one period yesterday.
They did. It was very bad at the first period, and then it was a complete turnaround in the second period.
30 shots on goal.
And it ended badly anyway.
Yes. So the Canadiens lose to the Anaheim Ducks. The numbers are brutal. They were outscored 16-5 in a 3-game road trip in California. Well, they just look horrendous, and it's a mess basically. And what needs to happen? Well, Carey Price has to start making some saves. That's, I think, sort of first and foremost. A lot's been made of the offensive difficulties. No matter what's going on, if your goalie's got an .880 save percentage, which is roughly what Carey Price is putting up right now, you're not going to win hockey games at this level. You might be able to win hockey games in, Bantam Double B, but once it gets to the National Hockey League, you're not winning with an .880 save percentage. So Carey Price looks bad, and his contract hasn't kicked in yet. Now, I have found myself sort of wondering and thinking about it, because Price wasn't that good last season. He was fine after coming back from the injury and after playing in the World Cup, but he was below the standard you'd expect from Carey Price. And so far this season, he's been below the standard you'd expect from a replacement level NHL goaltender. He's been downright bad. He's been one of the worst goaltenders in the National Hockey League. So does that continue? Is that something that he's going to be able to turn around? He's not going to be this bad, right? I mean, he's not going to be an .880 goalie, but can he be a .930 goalie like he was in his Vezina season and his Hart Trophy season? That's a tall order. And I'm not convinced that he's going to be able to do that. Now, he's far from, and I would hate to characterize the Canadiens' problems with it's Carey Price's fault. It's not. It's part of a much larger picture here. Something that anybody who's observed this team knows is that they rely far too much on Carey Price and depend far too much on Carey Price to deliver results for them and to stand on his head in situations where most teams probably wouldn't be able to win. But because they've got Price, they can sort of sit back and let teams come at them. But it's not working. It's not working this year. It really isn't. So I'm just going to do that. All right. So Marc Bergevin is the architect of this mess for the Canadiens. And this goes back. He's in year 6 of his tenure as general manager. And the Canadiens have seemingly, except in the case of when Price was injured and they had a bad season, which they blamed on PK Subban, that they've sort of seemed to have sort of gotten a little bit worse every season over the course of his tenure. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like they do a little bit less every year. And that would culminated in a 6-game loss in the first round of the playoffs last year. And now here they are off to the worst start. The worst start the Montreal Canadiens have been off to since 1941. This is like pre-Pearl Harbor, last time the Canadiens were in this bad of a situation this early in the season. And why is this happening? Well, I think that I have theories about this, and they're not great. If you're a Habs fan, it looks like and what it's starting to look like here. And I hope that they turn it around. I still think that they will not be that bad, which may sort of prolong this painful experience that they're currently going through. But I guess part of you as a sports fan wants to just say, all right, well, if we're going to be bad, let's be the worst and get the first overall draft pick, right? And if you really want to be very sort of, I don't know what the philosophical term would be to describe this, but really sort of big picture. If your team is not going to win the Stanley Cup, the best thing that can happen to them is to get the first overall pick, right? I mean, pretty much.
Right.
It's the second best thing that can happen to your team. Winning the Stanley Cup, best thing. Second best thing, winning the Austin Matthews lottery, for example. And this year's lottery ain't no Austin Matthews lottery, at least by the looks of things. But you never know. You never know. But there's nobody that's currently on the radar Matthews style, right? So in one sense, you think about how getting the first overall pick is, and I know it's only 8 games into the season. It's crazy to be talking about this right now, but that's what they look like. They look like a lottery team. I mean, they are so incredibly bad. It's hard to wrap your head around. What do they have? A minus 30 goal differential? What are they, 8 games into the season? I mean, this is crazy. It is totally crazy what's going on. So anyway,
it's historically bad. I mean, like you mentioned, it is historically bad. And it's one of those things where like people are pointing and laughing. Obviously, it's something that sports fans do. They like to make fun of teams that are bad or teams that they don't like that are bad. But it's people that are in awe of how badly it's going.
Well, because every time it looks like they're going to turn a corner too, something terrible happens.
Exactly.
And last night's game was sort of that in a nutshell, wasn't it? It was okay. Second period, gut check time. Here we go. Down 3-0 after a catastrophic first period in Anaheim. And they came out and they played great. They looked really good doing it.
Which is also a change for the Habs, because they do tend to have one of those second periods that, they'll do really well in the first period. They'll sit back. The other coach will do adjustments in the second period. So they, in the last couple of years, they haven't had a really good second period. So even that was a change in the narrative. But it, of course, resulted in more goals again.
Right. And so, yeah, they score the 2 goals. They get 30 shots on goal in the second period. They come at the Ducks, and John Gibson was great. John Gibson was everything that Carey Price hasn't been so far this year, which is a good NHL goaltender. John Gibson made the saves, kept the Ducks ahead, got out of that period, and then along came the third period, and that was that. There was the quick run, which culminated in that third goal, which we just heard there on the way into this show, and you've got a 6-1 the final? 6-2. They scored another goal. Yeah, I think I might have changed the channel or something by that time, but it's okay. So 6-2, and it all happened so fast and so late at night. So this West Coast trip sort of wraps up, and I guess what I'm wondering about when I think about this Canadiens team right now is, to what extent has time passed Marc Bergevin by, and to a potentially more worrying extent, to what extent has time passed Claude Julien and his system by? Now, listen, sometimes you try to go too far below the surface to try to explain things, i.e. the Canadiens are shooting at 5% and they are getting an 880 save percent. So that's why they're bad, really, right? The shooting percentage, it's very bad.
They're not scoring goals and they're letting in goals. Like that's what it always comes down to, right?
But the thing that worries me about this is that this sounds a lot to me, and although not with the goaltending, but with the shooting problems, it sounds like Claude Julien's Bruins at the end. because all you would hear about Claude Julien's Bruins was they're a great analytics team. They're going to figure this out. Their Corsi is very good. They get a lot of shots. They consistently outshoot opponents. They're going to figure it out. And it never happened. And now we're sort of seeing the same thing, at least it seems to me, happen here in Montreal. And then you add the not getting any saves from your goaltender thing. The second any adversity arrives, they crumple like a deck of cheap cards. At least it seems that way. Right? As soon as anything bad happens, as soon as something doesn't go their way, it's just death spiral immediately. And so what I guess would be worried about, and I hope, I'm not even saying I necessarily think this, it's just something I'm concerned about, that maybe Claude Julien's system, and we see that the game has changed a lot. Think about what Mike Sullivan was able to do with the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Bruins, I think, are they a better team now than they were when Claude Julien was the coach?
They seem to look like it.
I think so.
Yeah.
So has time passed Claude Julien and his system by? If that's true, the Canadians are in sort of a world of hurt. And the reason for that is that there are 4 contracts that this team currently has that are starting to look anywhere on the spectrum from terrible to potentially frightening. Okay, the first contract is Shea Weber's contract. Now, right off the top, this is not a surprise to many of us here. Shea Weber's perfectly fine, but he's not getting better at age 32. He's going to turn 33 this year, I believe. And his contract goes for like the next 7 years or something like that. I mean, it's a long time. He's not going to get better. Nobody gets better between the ages of 33 and 40. And that's if he sees out the lifetime of this contract.
And the best case scenario for that is for him to retire.
And that screws Nashville over, although I'm sure the league might find a way of
alleviating that.
Yeah. So there's that one. The second one is Carey Price. Now, again, I'm not saying that Carey Price is done, but $10.5 million that kicks in next year for 8 more seasons. Is Carey Price going to get better? He's 30 years old now. I'm not convinced that he will. So that's 2. That's $20 million of cap space for 2 guys that so far this year, Price has been downright bad, and Weber has been up and down. He's been okay. He's probably been the Canadians' best defenseman, but that's not saying much. And it might be his partner. It might be Victor Mete, who's actually been better. The third one is Marc Bergevin. Marc Bergevin has a contract, I think, until the 21-22 season. Now, I don't expect that the Montreal Canadiens are a team that would necessarily worry about that. And I'm not saying that they're thinking about letting the guy go, but if this continues, that's obviously what happens. You don't get off to the worst start a team has had in 75 years and expect that you're going to be able to hang on forever. Now, again, the Canadiens can turn this thing around. I'm not saying they should fire Marc Bergevin. I'm not saying they will fire Marc Bergevin. However, if they end up a lottery team this year, I'd be willing to say that there's a good chance that happens. But hopefully the team doesn't say, well, he's got a contract till 2021, 2022. We're not just going to pay him to leave. What a crazy contract that is. And the last one is Claude Julien. He's got what has he got? 4 years left on his contract, or is it 5? I think he gave him a 5-year contract at $25 million. Now, did last year count?
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah. Because I believe for coaches, it's the same thing. Like,
Okay.
I believe so.
Still 4 years for Claude Julien. Now, not to be too alarmist, maybe they figure this thing out, right? Maybe the Carey Price starts stopping pucks, which would just change the entire narrative here, although they still have a massive hill to climb if they are going to make the playoffs this year, which seems like kind of a joke at this point. But if he doesn't, if Carey Price, and that's sort of what this all starts with and what this all rides on, is Carey Price going to start making saves? And if he does, then the Canadians will be okay. They'll be an okay team, but I don't know if they'll be a good team. We've seen good teams. We see what good teams look like, and that's not what Montreal looks like. Montreal looks old, slow, and it looks like Marc Bergevin played his hand and ended up with a pair of 2s. It's Carl Alsner does not look good, and he's not going to get better. Jeff Petrie looks like he aged 5 years in the last 2. They've got Victor Mete, who's a bright spot for this team. They've asked a guy who's never played center before to be their number 1 center, and he's done a pretty decent job of it, but it's a massive ask for Jonathan Drouin. Their captain appears to be a lost soul who is doing some soul searching and had some good moments in that game yesterday, but you got concerns there as well. And I'm watching games. I'm watching the New Jersey, Ottawa the other day. Who would have thought New Jersey and Ottawa, a game that I watched the other night, would be, I was like, It was must-see TV. I couldn't tear myself away from the television screen. Jersey, Ottawa, man. Jersey's my least favorite team, has been historically my least favorite team to watch from an entertainment standpoint. And Ottawa is known for their stifling defensive style. What a great game. Erik Karlsson was unbelievable the other night. We saw Nico Hischier score the first 2 goals of his career. You saw a dramatic finish with, who was it? John Moore scored the winner. It was just a crazy game. It was a very good game. And the entertainment, the speed, the flair with which the game is being played by teams like that, the Montreal is just not in that. They're not in that category right now. But it's not over yet. Anyway, speaking of teams that are not off to terrible starts. Wait a minute, that didn't make any sense. All right, how about we talk about a team that's not off to a terrible start? The Las Vegas Golden Knights. They've been fantastic so far this year. Steve Karp covers the team for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, on the beat now as a hockey writer. So let's find out what's going on with the Knights after a very, very hot start to the season. That's what's coming up next year on Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio, streaming live on Periscope, Facebook Live, and hockeyprimetime.com.
Stick handle is way loose. Ekman Larson stays with him all the way. Perron tough to knock off the puck. Feeds Neal. Shot! Score! There it is again! James Neal with the overtime winner. And the Golden Knights are 2-0.
1-10. 1-10. Don't wanna be a monkey wrench.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, wow. What a start to the season for the Vegas Golden Knights, and the party continues. And, hey, welcome to the National Hockey League. I thought being an expansion team was supposed to be difficult. Not so far for Vegas, although the early days yet. And you've got the whole, what would you call that crowd? The naysayers out there. You guys can't keep this up. Oh, played all your games against teams that aren't necessarily offensive juggernauts. beaten up on the Arizona Coyotes, whatever. It's been great. They are, 5-1 on the season so far. 2 wins in a row. They just keep getting the job done. And yes, it's time for us to do a Vegas Golden Knights specific segment. I don't think we've ever done this before on the show. So it's the inaugural Vegas Golden Knights oriented segment. We have brought in Steve Karp from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He's covering the team this season. Hello, Steve.
How are you?
I'm doing great, man. And thanks.
Well.
Yeah, good. And you know what? Thanks for making time for us. We appreciate it. This has been, I mean, you couldn't have drawn up a more fun and better start for this team than the one they've had, can you?
Well, if they were 6-0, they should have beaten Detroit. But then again, they should have beaten Dallas or Arizona in Glendale. So I guess it all evens out in the end. But yeah, no, it's wonderful for the team. It's wonderful for the fans, and it's great for the city, which obviously could use something to hang on to after the incident on October 1st.
Yeah, no kidding. And that did sort of cast I'd say it's impossible. I mean, nothing can remove the shadow that was cast over the city, I'm sure, and the country and just everybody when that happened. But hey, we'll take wins when we can get them, and the Golden Knights have been delivering them. That was James Neal scoring an overtime winner. You heard on the way in there. He's got 6 goals and 8 points on the season already. So James Neal, the veteran, who's actually, I was looking at it, not as old as I thought he was. He seems like he's been around forever, but he's been fantastic, hasn't he?
He's done a great job considering he missed all of the preseason as he was recovering from surgery on his right hand. If you remember, he broke his hand in the first game against Anaheim in the Western Conference Finals, and he played hurt the rest of the way for Nashville. And not tremendous. He's been great in the room, and on the ice, obviously, he's been the Knights' go-to guy.
And in goal, here's something else that we might not have expected. Okay, they're going to lose Marc-Andre Fleury to injury. No problem. They'll just pick up Malcolm Subban on waivers. He's got 2 wins since coming over, including against his former team. Another sort of fairy tale moment when he was able to close the door on the Bruins. Another sort of nice story, what Malcolm Subban's been able to do, isn't it? It
has been. Obviously, when they let Calvin Pickard go and then moved him to Toronto, none of us were quite sure what George McPhee was thinking. It was like, okay, what if Fleury gets hurt? Then what? Well, sure enough, Fleury gets hurt against Detroit, and now Malcolm Subban gets thrust into the situation, and he's performed well. He played very well against the Bruins, and he played okay against Buffalo. And, you know, he's a young goalie, and I think, you know, the upside that he has, they're willing to, you know, take a shot with him and hope he can emerge one day as their goalie, because Fleury won't play forever, obviously. But, you know, Subban's only 23 years old. We keep forgetting that. He was a first-round pick in Boston. So somebody must have seen something in him. So, so far, so good in net with him taking Fleury's place.
And of course, now Boston's got, and they had Tuukka Rask, who isn't going anywhere anytime soon, although he's been dealing with the concussion lately. So they could probably use him right now. But anyway, he's long gone. And yeah, first-round pick, as you mentioned. This is a guy who was highly touted coming in, and sometimes a change of scenery is all you need. So a nice little story there, as he beat the Bruins the other day, and then, as you mentioned, a little bit more dicey, but still got the job done against a very hungry Buffalo team the other day. I mentioned this on the way in, but some have mentioned the sort of the quality of competition that the Knights have faced so far this year. I guess by NHL standards, they've had sort of an easy schedule so far. You can only face the teams that are on your schedule, but are you expecting a sort of a regret? I mean, I don't think they're going to go run the gamut here and then win 60 games this season. I'm sure nobody expects that, but they're going to come crashing down to earth, or at least land on earth at some point, right?
Common sense would dictate that. Now, whether it comes to pass or not, time will tell. But for the moment, they've taken advantage of the schedule. Like you say, they're in the midst of a 7-game homestand. And tonight is game 5 of that 7-game homestand. They have Chicago coming in Tuesday. And, of course, St. Louis tonight. And the Blues are playing really, really well. And then Colorado, which has not played all that bad, wraps it up on Friday. And then they go on their first long road trip. They're going to New York, to Boston, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal. So that's kind of, to me, will be the real test when they have to play on the road and stuff. And, of course, tonight and Tuesday against the Blues and the Blackhawks. So, yeah, I think they are about to be tested for class, if you will, like they say at the racetrack, and we'll see how they do.
We're talking to Steve Karp of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, covering the Vegas Golden Knights, who are second right now in the Pacific Division, trailing only the red-hot LA Kings. A real nice start to the season there. And, you know, I guess the other thing that you want to see happen, and we saw this in Arizona, was Arizona has been, from my perspective at least, kind of a catastrophe from an expansion standpoint. It never really seemed to take hold down there. They've been in a couple of different buildings. Nobody shows up for their games, but the league persists in keeping it going there, and that's something you want to avoid. But if there is a silver lining to come out of the Arizona expansion, it's that Austin Matthews probably would not be playing hockey. He'd be playing something else, maybe baseball or something else, if not for the fact that there was an expansion team there in Arizona. And I guess that's what having an NHL team can do, an expansion team, even in a non-traditional market like Phoenix, or in this case, like Vegas. So what are the Golden Knights doing to sort of put down hockey roots in the community at a lower level?
Well, for starters, they began a travel program called the Junior Golden Knights, who are playing all over the country. And it's running from, I believe it's from squirt, or maybe up to Pee-wee, and all the way through to junior. So they've got kids playing all over. Plus, they're developing a house league for boys and for girls. They want to start a high school league like the Ducks did a few years ago, which has been really successful, by the way, in Southern California. And they are ready to invest in the community of grassroots hockey. There's a big tournament going on in their practice facility this weekend. They've already had a couple of other tournaments. And, I mean, if you're a family, a hockey family, and you're traveling, why wouldn't you want to come to Las Vegas for a weekend during the season, especially if you're in the Midwest or the East Coast and it gets snowy and cold in November, December, January, and February? So they've got a beautiful facility. It's 2 sheets, and they're utilizing it around the clock. They've got hockey going on. They've got clinics they've been holding. They're getting kids involved in the city. They're going to the schools. They're doing street hockey and ball hockey stuff. It's just a question of getting kids up on skates and teaching them the game, because when they watch the games, they say to their parents they want to play. And, you know, for some families, obviously it's a cost issue, but the NHL with its initiative to play, allowing young kids to play for free and learn the game is a big help, and the Knights are part of that. So, yeah, they are invested in the community and youth hockey, and I think you're going to see, I think one day you'll see another Jason Zucker actually come out of Vegas and make the NHL.
Well, it's something to look forward to, and it must be fun down there, especially riding this early wave. Enjoy it, Steve. Thank you for making time for us today. We appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
There's Steve Karp, Las Vegas Review-Journal, covering the Vegas, not the Las Vegas, the Vegas Golden Knights. So winners of 2 games in a row, 5-1, and second in the Pacific Division. Geez, we're going to have to talk Kings at some point, too. What a start to the season they've been off to, undefeated in regulation. And that's the only thing keeping Vegas out of first place so far. All right, what do we have coming up next? Really looking forward to this. So we're going to talk to Greg Wyshynski. We haven't checked in with Wish for a while, and he's got a new gig at a fairly prestigious outfit. So we'll talk a little bit about what he's up to, what he's writing about. The Glow Puck? They're going to bring back the Glow Puck? Apparently fans want it, unless they're trolling Wish. I'm not sure. So anyway, we'll find out what the story is with that next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio, streaming live on Periscope, Facebook Live, and hockeyprimetime.com. right, 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back. It's Hockey Primetime here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. The show's also streaming live on Facebook Live, on Periscope, on hockeyprimetime.com as well. So if you want to see what we look like, I recently got a haircut. So, I mean, you can check that out if you want on the Facebook Live feed. I'm not trying to tell you what to do or anything. But if you want to, get into the comments and tell me what you think of the show or the haircut or whatever else might be going on in your life. Happy Saturday evening. We got a whole bunch of games to look forward to tonight, including the Senators and the Leafs. I don't know if you're aware of this, Laura, but Austin Matthews is off to a very strong start to the season. But some would say, as a headline on TSN that actually made me laugh out loud, does Austin Matthews get the credit he deserves? I think probably he does. So let's find out what our next guest thinks. His name is Greg Wyshynski. He's got a new gig with ESPN. He's their senior NHL writer. He's also a podcaster extraordinaire with Dave Lozo on Puck Soup. Greg Wyshynski, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Rookie of the Year, gets votes for the Hart Trophy last year, has been compared to everyone from Ante Kopitar to Mario Lemieux. In fact, the Toronto Sun said the only comparison that can be made to Austin Matthews is Austin Matthews. Clearly does not get the credit that he deserves as a second-year player.
It is hilarious to me, and I work for TSN, and I'm not trying to crap all over the network or anything like that, but it is hilarious to me that somebody was like, yes, this will be the question. Does Austin Matthews get the credit he deserves? When in Canada and around the hockey world, that it's like we've been saturated with Austin Matthews content in the first 2 weeks of the season to such a great extent that it's unfathomable that this guy's not getting the credit he deserves. And he is amazing, though. I mean, he is truly amazing. And I know you and I on a different network had a chance to talk a little bit about this, but he sort of seems like he could be the next great American face of the game, doesn't he?
For sure. But what I will say about that TSN thing, though, is that it did tap into a very interesting vein in current hockey zeitgeist, which is that all of the Edmonton fans were up in arms over this idea that the Toronto-centric part owner of the Leafs would somehow be, considering the star player underrated, when in fact the Edmonton fans feel that Conor McDavid doesn't get enough mention or coverage on the Toronto-centric network. So it's a really interesting dynamic where you have Conor, who I think is the better player. I think he's an all-world player. I mean, the movie made the other night against the Blackhawks was Gretzky-esque. I think that there's an interesting dynamic that's growing here where they think they have the best player in the world, and then the Toronto-based center of the hockey universe media might be covering their guy more than they are giving Conor the hero worship. So it's a really interesting little dynamic setting up. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's just the kind of thing that you want to see happen in hockey, where you have two generational talents going head-to-head. The last time we had that was Sid versus Ovi, and that was one of the things that got us out of the malaise of the 05 lockout.
Right. And it's funny because when I hear you say that, I think last year of Winnipeg fans with Patrick Laine, where there was a sort of a similar thing where it was like, well, what about us? We've got Patrick Laine. Why is everybody talking about Austin Matthews? And now you've got the Edmonton McDavid thing. What would you say? I mean, from the outside looking in, I'd be curious, and I know that you've been known to crack the odd joke about Canadian hockey fans and or the fact that no Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup for the last quarter century or so. But what is it about Canadian hockey fans and sensitivity? Is there anything different about the sensitivity of Canadian fans versus that of fan bases in the States?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for rounding up. And unless that's a prediction, and honestly, I mean, I think it's only a matter of time now with the growth of the Leafs and the strength of the Oilers when they're playing well and they're healthy. That the Cup's coming back to Canada at some point. No, I don't. I mean, I think it's just a different media dynamic. I mean, here in the States, our main complaint is hockey not getting covered, which is one of the reasons why I'm really happy to be at ESPN, because I can try to affect change there and find ways to make people pay attention to hockey that don't currently do so. But in Canada, I think it's much more of this nationwide gripe that with TSN and Sportsnet both being Toronto centric, with so many of the prominent journalists in Canada being Toronto centric, I think that there's a sense of the Leafs, and this goes back to a generational thing too, where people, watch hockey night in Canada, and 85% of the time it's a Leafs game. I think there's just this sense of, no matter how good we are, the trials and tribulations, the success and failure of the Toronto Maple Leafs will always get more coverage than my team does. So I that's a very interesting thing. And then of course the interesting thing is that you've got the Canadiens that are sort of an adjacent thing, who even during the most dire times probably don't get the same amount of national coverage as when the Leafs are having dire times. But in watching their fans react to how bad last night went against the Ducks, I did get a whiff of that sort of Leafs thing where it kind of reminded me of the last throes of the MLSE group before Shanahan arrived, or maybe the early part of the Shanahan regime, where it's not just the entire hockey world mocking Montreal for being that bad. It's Canadiens fans mocking their own team because they want their general manager fired and they lament the Subban trade. It's become an interesting time where it's almost like everybody's on the same page, being angsty about the direction of the franchise. Last time I think that happened was probably the last year Kessel was there in Toronto.
Huh. Interesting. And, just one more thing on this, and I think this is something a lot of Canadian hockey fans outside of the Toronto area sort of lose sight of. And even here in Montreal, like Montreal's the second biggest city in Canada. It's a big city. It's a world-class city, but still mostly Francophone. Most of the people who live here speak French. So TSN is not serving those people. They don't go to TSN for coverage, but there's like 7 million Leafs fans in Southern Ontario. There's like 700,000 Winnipeg Jets fans in like the world. So, it's a dollars and cents thing for them too. Like you don't want to, you don't want to lose sight of that, let alone the national appeal that teams like the Leafs and the Canadiens have. Like these are just teams that have way more fans than the other teams, which it makes sense for a media network to focus on that, to generate interest, to get clicks, to get people watching their content or reading their content. You want to focus on the things that are going to get you the most people reading, right?
Sure, but I mean, I think there's also a sense from fans in other cities, rightfully or wrongly, I think the system's rigged because the two major media companies own the Leafs, and
right.
It's the same thing we hear in the States when the Flyers would get, the Flyers would not be a playoff team yet they'd get 19 games on NBC, and everybody's like, oh, Comcast, here we go, the Comcast team gets the rub even though they're terrible. And so I think there's also that kind of conspiratorial thing, too, that crosses people's minds.
We're talking to Greg Wyshynski, ESPN senior NHL writer. And before we move on to a couple of other things I wanted to get to, I know that it is something that you mentioned in your new piece, the NHL Weekly Reader on ESPN.com. The Leafs Stanley Cup favorites, really? Already?
Yeah. Well, putting it over. For those who don't, I mean, I've only been at ESPN for the week, but if you are a Puck Daddy fan and you were wondering about the Puck headlines like we used to do every day, we're not going to do that every day on ESPN, but this weekly reader thing is going to be a way for us to highlight and spotlight some of the great work that's being done by blogs and other media on the big stories of the week. So it should run every Saturday morning, so check it out. But as far as the Leafs Stanley Cup odds, remember, like when it comes to the odds, they're trying to entice people to wager, right? So the Leafs odds are kind of shocking right now, but with the way they're rolling, I mean, you might rope some people in to wager on them, even if they might be a team you don't expect to win the cup. I think the Ducks were the one that really stood out to me. Their odds dropped a bit. I still think that's a team that if things break the right way, could make a run for the cup this year. That was one that I kind of had my eye on. And of course, the most hilarious thing is there's like 12 teams that have worse Stanley Cup odds than the expansion Golden Knights right now, which is amazing. I mean, I don't know if Vegas realizes that half the team is going to be sold off at the deadline for picks. But I guess, when things are going well, things are going well.
Right. And I mean, the other thing is that they're going to lose a lot of games between now and then too. Like we were just talking Golden Knights. We had Steve Karp, who's a beat writer covering the team on, and I mean, the party's on right now, but come on now. There will be a landing, and it probably will be with a thud. You just got to look at that lineup. I mean, what they're doing right now is crazy, but all good things must come to an end. Hey, Greg, what's with this glow puck thing? Like, this has been an ongoing thing in your career. 2 days ago, the headline, "Bring back the glow puck." No, I'm serious. Come on now. What's going on?
Well, earlier in the week, Gary Bettman was inducted into the Sports Broadcasters Hall of Fame, I guess because he got a $2 billion deal at the NBC or something. And he made mention of the technology of the glow puck as one of the things that the NHL kind of had contributed to the pantheon of television, in the sense that technology didn't work for the glow puck, but worked to establish the first down line, the CGI line in football, and really enhancing the viewing experience for NASCAR and things like that. So he was talking about that, and then he said, the technology's gotten better. We're going to use it for playing tracking, and who knows, maybe the glow puck will come back at some point. Kind of hinted at that. So it made me think about it, and made me think that, why did I hate the glow puck when it was on Fox back in the mid '90s? And there's a lot of reasons to hate it. It kind of made the game look really cartoony and stuff, with that stupid comet tail that was shooting off the back of the puck. But the main gripe I had with it was technology. The tech wasn't there yet. The same reason why George Lucas shouldn't have done the special editions of the Star Wars movies. It looks fake. It's stupid. The glow puck was like the Jabba the Hutt they put into A New Hope. But now the tech's there, and it looks great in every other sport. And it does make me wonder if there's a way to do it now where it wouldn't be completely distracting and embarrassing. And the most amazing thing about writing about it this week was finding how many people actually liked it. Even the first iteration of it back in the mid '90s, I was not a fan at all. I think it was one of the worst ideas that they've ever had. But a lot of people had some palpable nostalgic for having gotten into hockey when it looked like that for 2 years.
I definitely remember being a kid and thinking it was really cool. Like we couldn't get it because we didn't have Fox Hockey, I guess, or I don't know what it was. I guess Fox wasn't as readily accessible up here in the frozen north at the time, whatever it was. But I remember the All-Star game had it, and we were able to watch it. And it was like, wow, look at this. And it was really all about the streak or whatever. But I don't look back on it with fondness. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I've become bitter and older. And I guess the other thing about it too is it's like, I watch hockey. I can track the puck. I don't need this thing. This thing is stupid. This is for people who don't like hockey or don't know hockey. You know what I mean? That sort of that hockey fan thing that some of us maybe do.
Yeah, but I think it's one of these things where, like, the necessity for it is no longer there. I mean, the reason that they had it is because the games were in standard definition back in the 90s.
True.
And it was hard to follow the puck if you weren't a fan and knew where it was going. And so using it then made sense. And also the televisions are smaller. Now we have high def, we have 4K, the televisions are huge. You don't need it necessarily now, even if the tech to do it will make it less egregious. Where I do think it's kind of an interesting, insofar as it's being applied, would be an outdoor game. Because in an outdoor game, the camera setups are typically not in a place where they are inside the arena, where it's super easy to see the pucks in the corners and when it's by the near boards and stuff. So doing it then, especially when it could be a little distracting with the glare and everything else, might not necessarily be the worst idea in the world.
Some great hockey stuff at ESPN.com, not just with Greg, but with Emily Kaplan, Chris Peters. Emily Kaplan is a very cool piece up right now that's worth checking out. The now and later rankings, best player, best team today, and who will surprise us in 4 years, polling over 50 NHL players, scouts, front office execs, and coaches. So worth checking that out as well. Loving the stuff you guys are doing there, Greg. Thank you for making time for us here today.
Anytime, Connor. Thanks for having me.
That is Greg Wyshynski, ESPN's senior NHL writer. They've put together a pretty nice-looking team there. When we come back, I want to try something new here. I don't know if this is going to work, but I always like power rankings. I always get fired up about power rankings, like in any sport, right? Is there anything more annoying than your favorite team not being where you want them to be in power rankings, right? So I've got power rankings. I'm going to do top 5, bottom 5 teams, and turn this into a weekly feature if it's any good. If it's terrible, we'll never do it again. So let's find out. Let's roll the dice on some power rankings next. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. Laura Sabb is here with me. We've still got plenty to get to in the next hour of the show. including we've got some Dallas talk coming up, some Hawks talk, and we will talk Leafs with Mike Zeisberger, the Red Hot Leafs, and Austin Matthews. We're finally going to give this kid some credit. So all that coming up in the next hour and 10 minutes or so. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Hey there. It's Hockey Primetime here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. We have a trade to announce. Oh, thank you, Gary Bettman. Yes, indeed we do. Riley Sheehan, who's had that crazy season last year, he could not score. Remember, the entire season, he couldn't buy a goal. Will Riley score? And then he did score. And then he scored the second, the two last goals in the history of Joe Louis Arena in the last game of the season there. And anyway, he's not a Red Wing anymore. The Penguins, maybe it's seen enough of Greg McKegg with a leg for an arm and an arm for a leg as their third-line center. And maybe Riley Sheehan moves into that spot. We'll see. But it's Riley Sheehan to Pittsburgh for Scott Wilson and apparently an exchange of picks. That's according to Bob McKenzie, TSN Hockey Insider, reporting that just moments ago. So if we get any more details or confirmation from the teams, we'll let you know. But we know Bob is pretty solid when it comes to this stuff. It's Power Rankings time, end of hour number 1 of the show, and hour number 2 is right around the corner. So what should we do? Good teams first or bad teams first?
Let's do bad teams first.
Bad teams first.
Yes,
okay, fine. So we will count down the top 5 teams at the bottom of the power rankings. Let's start here. The Minnesota Wild, for me, the 5th worst team in the National Hockey League so far this year. Let's see here. They are 1-2, I should say. So they've got 4 points. They've played only 5 games, but they do have only 1 victory, and they're in a division where no other team has less than 4 wins. Again, Minnesota's played only 5 games. I expect that they're probably going to figure this thing out, but they're off to a very bad start, and that is enough to get you into my power rankings. You'll have no power. So whoever's at the bottom, You got no power. I was going to make a super tasteless joke there. I'm glad I didn't do it. All right, let's move on. Next up, number 28, as we count down the bottom 5 teams in the Hockey Primetime Power Rankings, the New York Rangers. Sorry, Rangers fans, and maybe they turn this thing around, but man, oh man, does Henrik Lundqvist look like he might be done. They did get the job done yesterday. I know that. They're 2-5-2. They've played 9 games already this season. 9 games. I mean, Minnesota's played only 5. Carolina's played only 5, and they've looked pretty good so far. But 2-5-2 for the Rangers. Henrik Lundqvist doesn't look himself until yesterday. Their only win was against the lackluster Montreal Canadiens, the sad sack Montreal Canadiens, the skating embarrassment that is the Montreal Canadiens. So anyway, the Rangers are your 4th worst team in the power rankings. Hey, look, this is just today. These things can change. These things are always fluid, always in motion. You never know. Number 29, or your 3rd worst team in the NHL. Well, I got to go to the Atlantic Division, I believe to be the worst division in the NHL, and I got to give you the Buffalo Sabres. Oh, boy, it's bad. They're 1-5-2. Hey, good news is they've got 1 more point than Montreal. Bad news is they look like they're terrible again. And what's Jack Eichel thinking, having signed that monster and lengthy extension? He's always talking about how he hates losing. Well, it's Buffalo. It's become a way of life there. So until they turn this thing around, it's not looking good for the Sabres. Losers of 2 in a row, 1-5-2 on the season. Number 30, or the 2nd worst team in the NHL. It is the Montreal Canadiens. They are terrible. They've lost 7 games in a row. They've got only 1 win, and it was against Buffalo. And it took them a shootout to do it. They are terrible, but at least they have a win. They couldn't, as bad as they've been and as bad as they are, they could not be at the bottom of the power rankings, and that is because of the existence of the Arizona Coyotes. Wasn't this supposed to be the season that the Coyotes turned this thing around? They've lost 7 games this year. They're 0-6-1. And the science experiment looks like it's just flat out not working out there in the desert. So Arizona at the bottom of the Hockey Primetime Power Rankings, number 31, the Arizona Coyotes. Oh, that was a coyote howl for the Coyotes. All right, now your top 5. Let's start here. Number 5. The New Jersey Devils. I'm sorry, I got to give it to them. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep this up, but the Devils have been fantastic. They're leading their division right now. They're 6-2 on the year. I know that they did lose their last game, but they've been great. And what an exciting comeback win against Ottawa the other day. The Kings, number 4 on the list. LA has been fantastic. They haven't lost a game in regulation this year. 5-0-1. They lead the Pacific Division. So that's your number 4 team. Number 3, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know some might say that I should have them higher up here. I'm still going to wait and see. I like the Leafs. I think they're very good, and I think they deserve to be where they are. 6-1 on the season. They've got 12 points. They've won 3 games in a row. It did take them overtime to beat the lackluster Montreal Canadiens last weekend. I have them 3rd on my list. Number 2 is the Central Division leading St. Louis Blues. That's a tough division, and they have been fantastic. So the St. Louis Blues at 6-2 on the season. They got a ton of injuries. They have dealt with those injuries. They've been really, really good. So give me the Blues at number 2. And number 1 in the power rankings, I got the Tampa Bay Lightning up there. 6-1-1 on the season. This is a very impressive hockey team. How about the chemistry between Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov? These guys look like they've got a Henrik Sedin, Daniel Sedin style symbiosis going on. So I've got Tampa atop the power rankings for this week. To recap, Tampa number 1, St. Louis number 2, Toronto number 3, the Kings number 4, and the New Jersey Devils are number 5. That was fun. It worked. We broke a trade. Well, Bob McKenzie broke a trade, but we told you about it. Coming up next, we're talking Dallas Stars. Sean Shapiro covers the team for NHL.com. He's the Dallas correspondent, and we'll be talking Stars with Sean next. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
4-minute break here. lost Sean there. Give me a second.
Okay. God damn it.
Sorry, I just lost Sean again. Give me a second.
Now Ben, he'll skate it out to center ice. One hands it in behind the defense. Gets it himself. Turns against the Grange. Ben second. Scores! Oh, hammer of Thor! What a blast! And it's a 2-goal lead for the Stars on a 2-goal night for number 91.
Yeah. Hammer of Thor. Jeez. I mean, all right then, I suppose. You excited for Thor Ragnarok? Sounds pretty good. I mean, I'm not a huge Thor guy, but I think I'm going to check out that movie. The director sounds like a real New Zealand Kiwi weirdo who's doing something really cool with it. So that's what I thought of when I heard that highlight. Yeah, the Dallas Stars, 3-game winning streak. They've got a goaltender who's making some saves for the first time in a couple of years. Well, they did have that one magical season where Antti Niemi and Kari Lehtinen were somehow good. Well, it was so weird. Over the course of 82 games, how good those guys were. And then for the next 2 years, they were awful. And now finally, they've got an actual good goaltender there. They've got Ben Bishop in there. They've got Alexander Radulov. They've brought in Marty Hansel. Who else do they bring in there in Dallas? Nicholas Hjalmarsson. They had a really active offseason, and it appears to be paying dividends right now in a 3-game win streak that they have going on. So let's talk a little bit about these Dallas Stars who are looking to carry over what appeared to be a successful offseason into a successful actual regular season. They're currently 4th in a very competitive Central Division, but they are a team on the rise right now. Sean Shapiro covers the Dallas Stars for NHL.com. He's their Dallas correspondent, and he joins the show right now. Hello, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making time. We appreciate it. And this 3-game winning streak right now, I know so much. And here in Montreal, we're seeing it. Carey Price can't make a save. The Canadiens can't win a game. Ben Bishop is a good NHL goaltender. How much of a difference maker has he been already, just right off the top, with the Stars team this year?
Well, I think with Bishop's impact, the most incredible thing to watch with the Stars with Bishop, and even if you don't look at numbers or anything like that, it's just been the composure he's brought to the defense. There was, over the past 2 seasons, and they won then, but there was still, the defense was scrambly. It wasn't composed. It's just calmer, composed. It's a better poised defense, and obviously some credit is due to the coaching staff there. But Bishop has done that. And then of course there's also what he does when he's stopping the puck. For example, when they beat Arizona 5-4 the other night, with 4 goals on 31 shots, I believe, but he stopped 2 breakaways. He has arguably the biggest save of the season so far on a poke check on a step-in when it's he's making the timely saves, which the team didn't get in the past, and it's just you can see more confidence in the team because of having him back there.
And meanwhile, the one of the other big additions this offseason was Alexander Radulov, who fans fell in love with in Montreal last year. He's a fan favorite kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that hockey fans love. How's he fitting in so far?
He's playing on that top line with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, and it's a extremely talented line. I thought for the first couple of games there were still a little bit hiccups there, just figuring out how to play together, obviously, because they're all extremely talented. They're all used to having the puck, and you're sharing one puck between the 3 of them. But after 4 or 5 games together, they're starting to really click. We saw they combined for 3 points the other night. There's been some moments, particularly where you see them carry the puck into the play, and just it looks pretty. It's fun hockey to watch. And then Radulov, the biggest impact I think he's had for both Ben and Seguin is it's hard to get the puck off of him. He creates open space. He goes and wins those battles, and Ben and Sagan are starting to learn how to play with that extra open space when they've got a winger like that who makes life a lot easier for them.
No kidding. And so you've got Alexander Radulov, you got Ben Bishop, two new guys coming in, and expected to make big impacts. And looks like, as we just heard from Sean, Radulov starting to fit in on that top line. I guess that's the thing, right? It's not a video game. So as much as everybody said when they signed Radulov was like, wow, Ben, Sagan, and Radulov, I mean, this is going to be one of the best lines in the National Hockey League. You never really know how it's going to play out. So, did it require a little bit of patience to keep them together the way it started?
Yeah, there 5-on-5. Obviously, when they had this team has had instant success on the power play, but that's a bit easier. Obviously, one less guy in the ice for the opposing team. You got and it's all the power play success was there right away, but the 5-on-5 success took a little bit of time, and the patience was required. For example, we look back to in past seasons, the Stars would put Jason Spezza on a line with those two. And while that line had its great offensive moments, it wasn't very good defensively. And in a video game world, it would have been a great combination. But this line, Radulov's obviously a bit better defensively than Jason Spezza. This line had potential all along, but really took 4 or 5 games. And then once it really clicked, and I think there's still another step to that. But once it really clicked the first time, you started to say, okay, this is something that can stay together for the whole season. Because if not, if you were getting to it's a realm that, as you said, if you get to 7-8 games and they're not clicking, you might move them down in the lineup. There's a reason that you can't put your 3 best players on every line, on every team, because sometimes it just doesn't work out. But it seems like it's going to work with this group. The
Stars play the Carolina Hurricanes tonight. That's an 8 o'clock Eastern time start. And should be a pretty good game. 2 entertaining teams to watch. And that was sort of the trademark of these Dallas Stars a couple of years ago under Lindy Ruff, wasn't it? They had this great season where they were just sort of blowing teams out of the water. They were scoring so many goals. They were playing such a pleasing and entertaining and exciting brand of hockey. And they were getting saves, which was something that sort of dried up over the last couple of years. But with the way things are going right now, and it's just a 3-game losing streak. I'm not anointing this team the second coming of the 1976 Montreal Canadiens, but they look good, and they're getting secondary scoring, and it seems like they sort of are starting to get that identity, at least a little bit, of a team that's sort of able to come at you and attack you in waves, because it's not just the top end guys that are scoring now. It's they're getting offense from the blue line, and they're getting offense from their second and third lines as well, aren't they?
I actually think they need more secondary scoring. That's the one thing. That top line is getting its points, and right now the line with centered by Radek Fox has been getting some points lately. But you're still waiting to see kind of the Jason Spezza line breakout. You're still waiting to see.
We may have lost Sean there, eh? All right, it looks like Sean Shapiro may be having some connection issues out there in, Texas, I guess, right? Never know. It's a big state. There's all kinds of, wide open spaces out there, so that can happen. But the secondary scoring, you mentioned Radek Faksa, who is looking like a player for this Dallas team. It's amazing what a difference a goaltender can make. To go back to Ben Bishop and the fact that they were able to add him in this offseason. Now, Bishop comes in, and that just creates this sort of calming presence. And we heard Sean refer to it, the effect on the blue line. Remember that this was kind of it was like an blue line. Even when they were winning, when they were the best team in the Western Conference, it was like, I don't know how long this can hold up with the D that they've got here, but they made it work. And then everything crashed. John Klingberg, hopes were so high. He had kind of an off season, but he's come out of the gates looking really good. They've got Nicholas Chalmers in there, who's been succeeding. And they've also got a kid named Julius Honka, who I remember watching here in Montreal a couple of years ago at the World Juniors for Finland. And this was the player who most impressed me from that Finnish team that's had a couple of guys make the NHL since. Just a really good and not an overly big young defenseman, but Honka is now sort of coming into the team, and that's a tougher ask, I think, when you're talking about young defensemen and bringing up young defensemen. How much easier is it to put a young guy out there a guy who's, say, 19, 20, 21 years old, when you know you have a good goaltender out there behind him, a little bit more confidence, right? If he makes a mistake, well, chances are Ben Bishop's going to be able to cover that up and make the necessary save. But when you're so worried about goaltending, it can be a totally different story when you're thinking about young defensemen and the effect that it could have on them coming into a team. And every mistake that they make is magnified by the fact that it turns into a goal because your goaltender can't make a save. And I think that sort of I can bring that and tie that into what we saw, the massive trade that happened in this offseason between the Montreal Canadiens and the Tampa Bay Lightning, right? Mikhail Sergachev for Jonathan Drouin. Now, why is it that a team is able to trade a guy like Jonathan Drouin, a blue chip guy, a guy coming off the best season of his young career? Well, it's because they're such a smart team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they're so good at drafting, right? If you're good at drafting, you're halfway there. You're halfway to the playoffs. You're halfway to the dance. You do need a little bit of luck. You do need some saves. But if you're good at drafting, and I'll give you an example, Braden Point. They drafted Braden Point in the 3rd round a couple of years ago. He's 21 years old. Remember last year, Steven Stamkos went down. Then Tyler Johnson went down. And Braden Point, all right, kid, you're going to be our number 1 center now. What did he do? He was great. He was so good. And he's out of the gates this year. I think he's got 8 points in 8 games, and he looks so good. And don't get it wrong. I think one of the big reasons Tampa felt that they could trade away Jonathan Drouin, in addition to kind of having to do it for salary cap reasons, was the emergence of Point. They knew that they were good up the middle with Stamkos as C1, with Johnson as C2, and then now with Point as C3. That's a nice 1-2-3 up the middle. And I know Valtteri Filppula had gone from there as well, right? So some big sort of turnover there, but you got a kid like Point who makes it possible to move those guys and turn them into assets. What did they get? They traded Drouin for Mikhail Sergachev, who was considered one of the best defensive prospects playing junior hockey last year. He was outstanding, especially in the Memorial Cup, and now he makes the jump to the NHL. What's he done? What has he got? 6 points in 8 games. He's been great to start the season, but he's also being sheltered. He's being used in a team that has 7 defensemen, often play with 7 defensemen. He'll play 10, 11, 12, 13 minutes. I think he's averaging 12 and a half minutes per game. And when you have good goaltending that they have in Andrei Vasilevsky, and you're able to protect a kid like Sergachev and put him out there as a specialist, offensive zone time. You got an offensive zone face-off, get him out there. Power play, get him out there. They're putting the kid in a situation to succeed. He's on pace to get 60 points this season. That's obviously not going to happen, but he does look like he's going to establish himself as an NHL player. And what you can't do is look at what Sergachev is doing in Tampa and say, well, imagine what he might be doing here in Montreal. Because first of all, we just don't know. Second of all, anytime he makes a mistake, the way Carey Price is playing, it ends up in the back of the net. And third of all, they'd probably be using him in a far more prominent and difficult role than the one that Tampa's using him in. So he's out there. He'd likely be penciled in to play with Shea Weber. I mean, he's a more highly touted guy than the kid Mete, who's playing there with him now, has been so good for the Habs so far this year, one of the bright spots. But you need, and it all starts with being smart and being good in the draft, like Steve Yzerman and his staff are, just a model organization in the National Hockey League. How many teams could trade away a guy like Jonathan Drouin for a kid who's never played a game in the National Hockey League, or I should say had less than 10 games of experience in the National Hockey League? It's a mark of a team that's very confident in their ability to draft and develop players, and that's something that Tampa does so well. So it starts there. But you also, if you are going to put a kid into your team, even Aaron Ekblad a couple of years ago when he was Rookie of the Year, the Panthers didn't have him on the top pairing. A lot of people didn't know that or didn't realize that because they don't watch Panthers games. But he was protected in many ways. He was given more favorable matchups so he could grow into. And how hard is that to come into the NHL as an 18-year-old? But Sergachev doing it up as a 19-year-old, then now Honka over there in Dallas is, I don't think, a prospect of the caliber of Sergachev, for example, or Ekblad certainly. But it looks like they might have a good little player there. It's fun to see. Whenever you see somebody and you see somebody play live in junior and they're good, and you're like, ooh, that guy's good, you kind of have this thing where you want to see them succeed. You're like, well, maybe I do have an eye for this kind of thing. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he does, but he does. He's an eye-catching player. He's fast, and a guy who probably wouldn't be in the NHL 10 years ago. But you can be undersized. If you have speed, skill, and shiftiness, you can play as an NHL defenseman, even if you're not that big of a guy now. Coming up next, so let's talk Blackhawks. James Naveau covers the Hawks for NBC Chicago. They've been off to a pretty strong start this season. You may have heard that they didn't crack the top 5 in the power rankings here. I'm sorry. I mean, you got to make room for certain teams, and they were just outside the top 5, but they're very good. And let's talk a little bit about them with James Neveau. The Hawks on Hockey Primetime. That's what's coming up next year on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Hey, welcome back. You're listening to Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. We're also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. How you doing today? The Chicago Blackhawks are second in the Central Division, chasing right now after their hated rivals, the St. Louis Blues, who've been very good to start the season despite being very banged up to start the year. But the Hawks are looking good too, 4-2-2. They're keeping pace, and they are playing some entertaining hockey. Looking good so far. They had a crazy one against the Leafs early in the season and continue to look like they'll be one of the contenders in the Western Conference. With more on the Hawks, a pleasure to welcome back to the show from NBC Chicago. His name is James Neveau, covering the Blackhawks. Hello, James.
Hello, sir. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing terrific. Thank you very much. And thank you for making time for us. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Just trying to stay out of trouble up here at NBC Tower in Chicago, and just kind of been enjoying the roller coaster ride the Blackhawks have been kind of putting everyone on lately. It's been a really interesting first 8 games of the season, and definitely going to get a little bit more interesting in the next few days as they play in a couple of interesting road environments out in Phoenix and then out in Vegas.
And just as an aside, location-wise and in a city full of beautiful buildings, it must be pretty fun to go to work in the NBC Tower, eh?
It is actually really great. I get to walk by the Chicago Tribune Tower every single day. I get to walk up Michigan Avenue, get to go over the Chicago River. It's an incredibly beautiful downtown area, and I'm very fortunate that NBC Tower is dead smack in the middle of it, and it can definitely hold its own against those other buildings too. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Have you ever eaten at the Purple Pig? It's like across the street and a few blocks away.
I have not gotten a chance to go over there yet. I'm a more frequent partaker of the Billy Goat Tavern, which is down underneath Michigan Avenue and made famous by Saturday Night Live. So that's definitely more my scene. I definitely can dig the burgers and beers and kind of the, old school flavor of that place.
Yeah, that's a great burger too. All right. Anyway, we can't just talk about food as much as I'd like to. We have to talk about hockey. So a strong start for the Blackhawks this year. Well, we're only 8 games in, so it's only 8 games. However, it's also 10% of the schedule. So how are they in comparison to what you were expecting from them this year?
I have to be honest, they're about what I anticipated. They're a little bit better offensively, I thought, than they would be this season. They've gotten some great production out of Brandon Saad, which a lot of people saw coming. I've really been impressed with what Richard Panik and Ryan Hartman have both done. I've definitely thought that the Hartman, Kane, Schmaltz line has been absolutely fantastic this season. I think a lot of people thought that line would be pretty solid, but I think they also thought that Alex DeBrincat would end up on that second line at some point, and Ryan Hartman shows no signs of allowing that winger spot to go to the youngster. He is absolutely having a great start to the season, and I think he's been one of the pleasant surprises to start the campaign just because of how good he's been. And then on the other side of the coin, you have the team's defense, which I think a lot of people thought would be a little bit of a weak spot for the team, and it definitely has been. You've had some poor play from Brent Seabrook, who just continues to unfortunately slow down for the Blackhawks. Doesn't look like he's going to be that second, third pairing guy that you're definitely going to need him to be. But on the flip side of that, you have had a few pleasant surprises on that side of the puck, and one of them has been Jan Ruda, who has been absolutely fantastic in his first season with the Blackhawks, has all the makings of a top 2 or 4 defenseman. And I don't think a lot of people really anticipated that he would come into the NHL and have the kind of impact that he's had. So you've had some weakness on defense, but you've also had some surprising good play from Ruda. So this team's about what we expected, with a few moderate surprises mixed in there.
What about the fact that the Blackhawks right now are averaging, they're allowing, I should say, an average of, I think it's around 36 shots per game. How big of a concern is that right now?
Well, it's been pretty much par for the course for this team. I know when they won the Stanley Cup in 2010, they were one of the best shot-suppressing teams in the entire NHL. But over the years, you've seen guys like Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook start to get older. You've seen guys like Nicholas Hjalmarsson head out of town. So shot suppression has not been a strong suit of this team. And they didn't do anything to address their defense that made me think that wouldn't be a concern this season. But at the same time, even though you knew it was going to be a concern, it's still not exactly great to see the team giving up that many shots. Fortunately for them, they have had really strong play from Corey Crawford, who once again is having a really good start to the season. And Anton Forsberg has looked good in his couple of starts as well. So the Blackhawks definitely have the goaltending to deal with that kind of thing. The real question is, can that sustain if they're going to keep giving up 36 shots a game? And I think that's kind of the million-dollar question right now in Chicago, is whether or not Forsberg and Crawford will be able to hold up under that kind of scrutiny and that kind of pressure.
Well, so far so good, but yeah, long way to go still. And you mentioned Brandon Saad off the top, which was something I wanted to bring up. And I guess, moving Panarin out, who was sort of Patrick Kane's partner in crime, and we know that Jonathan Toews' numbers had been not really very Jonathan Toewsian the last couple of years without Saad, who was sort of his partner in crime. And you can correct me or you can, weigh in with your own take, but it sort of felt to me like they were like, we'll get rid of Patrick Kane's running. Well, get rid of might be a little bit harsh, but we'll trade the guy who's been riding shotgun with Patrick Kane here in Panarin in order to get Toews going again by bringing back Saad. And I guess with the hope being that, we think Kane is going to be able to produce no matter who he's playing with. Was that sort of what happened in your eyes, or if you care to comment on that sort of take?
I think I think you nailed it exactly right. I think the Blackhawks were looking for a few things when they made this trade. One, they were looking to get Jonathan Toews going again, because they know you can't only have one scoring line and expect to be successful in the NHL. You can't just have Patrick Kane's line and then 3 other lines be checking lines. It's just not the way hockey works. And so they looked at Brandon Saad as the most likely candidate to be able to kind of resurrect Jonathan Taves' offensive game. And I think in the first 8 games of this season, we've seen that. We've seen a more aggressive Jonathan Taves. We've seen a better offensive skilled Jonathan Taves. And obviously Brandon Saad's loving it. He's already got 6 goals this season, has been all over the front of the net, So I think that was definitely part of it, is they wanted to get Taves going to try to balance the scoring out a little bit. And I think to your point too, they kind of did know that Patrick Kane would be able to skate with kind of whoever they put him out there with. You can't obviously put him with a guy like Lance Boma and expect him to score 1 million goals. But guys like Ryan Hartman, guys like Nick Schmaltz, guys like Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Sharp, those kind of guys can definitely be good enough for Patrick Kane to still be able to put up good production. We've seen that in the early going. He's been able to do that. So I think they took a calculated risk knowing that Saad would definitely help boost Jonathan Taves' numbers at the expense maybe of a few goals or assists for Patrick Kane, who no longer has Artemi Panarin.
And then you've got 2 lines that can score, which is always a nice thing. And if the other lines are chipping in a little bit, all of a sudden you're winning more games than you're losing, and you're ahead of the curve. And looking at this team, there's a couple of other things that I was curious about. And you mentioned Alex DeBrincat. When we saw him at the Bell Center a couple of weeks ago, and he scored his first career goal on a beauty of a release. And interesting sort of full circle moment, as he was drafted by the Blackhawks with one of the second-round draft picks they got from Montreal in the Andrew Shaw trade a couple of years ago. So he comes into Montreal, scores his first career goal on a nice release, impressive moment, and a big moment for him in that building, in the Habs home opener, the way that it was. But how has he been other than that? I haven't had a chance to see a lot of him. He's a player I find fascinating. I'm always kind of rooting for these little guys to step up and succeed in the National Hockey League. So what are the early returns on Alex DeBrincat?
He's been a little bit slow to adjust to the NHL speed and the physicality of the game, and I think a lot of people kind of anticipated that he would be. But at the same time, you can see him subtly kind of game by game making those little adjustments that he needs to make. When to dump the puck in at the blue line instead of trying to carry it in and getting checked off of it with ease. He's made the smart passes more often than trying to go for the home run pass that rarely connects. He's been slowly but surely kind of getting a sense of what he needs to do on the ice. And then, as you mentioned, the raw skills that he has are just unbelievable. The speed along the boards, the ability to get away from checks, and the ability to get away from back check has just been so fun to watch. And then that release. Oh, man, Blackhawks fans were swooning over that shot when he fired it. That kid could stick handle in a phone booth. He has got incredible hands. You saw that when he was in the junior level, and you saw that this preseason, and he has kept showing it in the NHL. And when you see those kind of raw skills and you see the kind of adjustments that he's been able to make, the kind of subtle little changes that he's made in his game through his first 8 NHL appearances, it's been kind of remarkable watching him kind of grow as a player. And the Blackhawks have to feel really confident that he's going to keep trending in the right direction, and ultimately he's going to be one of their key offensive players in the years to come.
What about Connor Murphy, who came over in the offseason and I know was somebody that they hoped was going to be a difference maker for them on the blue line? Is still a young player and a guy who has sort of all the raw tools, but is confidence an issue? What's going on with him early in his Hawks career?
I would definitely classify Murphy. I know we're only 8 games in, but I would say he's been a little bit of a disappointment so far. I feel like he definitely has some issues to his game that he needs to address. I don't think he's used to having a team show the kind of confidence in him that he can play top 4 minutes. You've seen him be a healthy scratch already this season. You've seen some kind of careless mistakes on his part. I think he's kind of getting used to almost playing in a new role with the Blackhawks. I know he's got a decent contract, and I know that Arizona like to use him in kind of some high-pressure situations, but the Blackhawks need for him to be a top 4 guy. They've got to get better production out of him than he has put forth so far. And frankly, he hasn't really been able to do that so far. And I think the team is still being very patient with him. I know they made him a healthy scratch already, and that's going to happen when you've got 8 defensemen on your roster. You have to be able to kind of churn them over at the blue line. But I definitely think they want to see more out of Connor Murphy, and they're trying to kind of show that they still have confidence that he can be that kind of right-handed speed threat that they needed on their blue line to kind of balance things out a little bit with Nick Hjalmarsson gone. but he definitely has to show more than he's shown so far. And I think they still have faith that he can do it.
Do you think there's a danger that, remember that like Trevor Daley, who's been a pretty good NHL player for a while, not great, but good. And I think always kind of better than he was as a Hawk. Some guys, and it's not a Blackhawks thing, but some guys just don't fit sometimes, right? We've seen this before. Could this be that kind of a situation for Murphy in Chicago?
I still think we're a little bit too early to tell, and I still think we're going through a situation where the Blackhawks are kind of adjusting their approach to the game. I know they've been a team that preferred kind of stretch passes from the blue line and more kind of responsible play back there. But over the offseason, they've been definitely advocating a speedier style of play, like more aggressive blue liners who kind of pinch in more often. And it's going to result in some odd man breaks. There are going to be times when you're going to give up goals because of that aggressiveness. But at the same time, it's kind of this slow change in philosophy that the organization is kind of trying to embrace as they kind of start to prepare for life without your Duncan Keiths and your Brent Seabrooks. And I think with that in mind, I feel like Conor Murphy eventually is going to find kind of his place on this team. He's going to find kind of his niche. I don't see it ending up being like a Trevor Daley thing where the Blackhawks basically decided 10 games in that he did not fit at all, and they made it a point to get rid of him really quickly. I don't see that happening with Conor Murphy. I see it being more so that they're going to continue to kind of tailor their game plan towards his skill set. And I think it's going to be a process, but I think in the end, that's kind of what they're aiming to do.
James, thank you for your time. A pleasure as always, and enjoy what's left of the weekend.
I definitely will, sir. Thank you very much for having me on.
That's James Naveau, NBC Chicago, on the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Guess what? 30 minutes from now, the Battle of Ontario. Chapter, I don't know what, one of the later chapters, the most recent one, I guess. Remember last year, the first time the Sens played the Leafs? Do you remember? That's right. Austin Matthews scored 4 goals. Do you remember who won that game? The Senators won that game. Anyway, we'll see what happens tonight. It should be fun. We got a nice slate of games on schedule, starting with that one at 7 o'clock. Later on tonight, it'll be Minnesota at Calgary as the Wild look to get their lives together. Well, maybe not their lives, but their season together. But coming up next, let's talk Leafs. So we've got Mike Zeisberger, now with NHL.com. He's covering the league and the Leafs, as he has been doing for years and years. Zeiss is joining us next to talk about the red-hot Toronto Maple Leafs. Everything's coming up blue and white. We'll talk to Zeiss about the Leafs and more next on Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio, streaming live as well at hockeyprimetime.com, Periscope, Facebook Live, and other places.
Here's Matthews with Nylander, 2-on-1. Back to Matthews. He scores! Austin Matthews, 4 goals. Do you believe this? Holy Mackinac, the kid's on fire.
Yeah, that was the night Austin Matthews announced himself to the world. That was opening night of the NHL season last year. And what a night it was. A great little anecdote about that, too, from Craig Anderson in the last couple of days, right? Where in the lead up to this game tonight, you got the Leafs and the Leafs and the Sens. The Sens hosting the Leafs tonight. And Craig Anderson was the guy in goal for the Senators that night. And he said he had the stick that he used in that game lying around. And he decided, he was like, you know what, I'm going to get the kid to sign it. He gets Austin Matthews to sign the stick. And now Matthews, what did he write on the stick? He dedicates the stick. And he's perhaps a little bit more clever than I realized. I don't know if I realized that Austin Matthews was a wordsmith, as my mother would say. But he included a little bit of a pun in the dedication that he wrote on the stick, saying, let's see if I can figure this out. I'm such an idiot for bringing this up without having opened the article here. But yeah, it was back in October of 2016. And so Matthews writes, "Thanks for making my game memorable. Thanks for making my first game memorable with 4, the number FOUR. So thanks for making my first game memorable and signing the stick." But Anderson says he didn't take offense to it, remembering that it was the Senators who won that game, despite Matthews' is a crazy, crazy start. With more on this game tonight, and to look at a start to the season that's well, everything's coming up Leafs right now, and some people are complaining that they're getting too much attention. Mike Zeisberger's with NHL.com, covering the Toronto Maple Leafs and covering the NHL at large, and he joins us back here on the show again. Hello, Zeiss. Good morning. Good evening.
Thanks for having me on, and I think the Senators have a secret weapon tonight. They're cranking the rock music so loud here during the warm-up at the Canadian Tire Center. Maybe they think they'll give Austin Matthews a migraine when the game starts, because they really have it cranked here. But it's going to be a fun night, and we'll see what happens. And it's funny you mentioned the story about the stick. I'm just going to walk in the hallway so I can hear myself think. But you mentioned the story about the stick. Actually, Matthews came clean yesterday and said it was actually Leafs assistant equipment manager, Bobby Hastings, who came up with it and said, yeah, why don't we just say thanks for FOUR, the memorable day, or making my debut a memorable one. So, you know what? In a lot of different chapters in the Battle of Ontario, at least we have one that we can chuckle about a bit.
And you know what? It might have been, it seemed, it was like, geez, Austin Matthews. I mean, not only is this guy maybe the best goal scorer in the game right now, one of the best players already in the game, but he's also making very clever and hilarious puns. Like, geez, what can't this guy do? So maybe nice to hear him.
Yeah, well, he had a little bit of help.
Yeah, exactly. That's all right. That's nothing wrong with that. All right, so everything's coming up Leafs right now. I guess to start there, and a week ago it was an overtime win against the Canadiens, and everything's gone south for Montreal since then. And I can't help but feel like it. It's for some reason the two most iconic franchises in the sport always will sort of exist in tandem in a way. I feel like for Canadiens fans, it hurts that much more that they're so bad because of what's going on there in Toronto. And by the same token, I would imagine Leafs fans are feeling like it's that much sweeter that they're playing as well as they are, because Montreal is this train wreck that you can't take your eyes off of. What do you make of that assessment?
Well, first of all, Leaf fans may say right now, oh, yeah, we love watching the Canadians mired in mediocrity. But I think that's a little bit superficial, because if you look at it, I mean, the Leafs only made the playoffs last year for the second time, in over a decade. So I think Toronto fans are just more giddy about the fact that they have a competitive team. Now, we have to put things in perspective, because you mentioned the Canadiens. Was it last year or the year before where they started out like something like 8-0 or 9-0? And we all saw how that played out. So, you have to be proceed a little bit with caution. But I think the difference here is that when you look at the key players for the Leafs in terms of Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and I almost said Michael Nylander, his son William Nylander, but players like that, they haven't even touched their ceiling yet. Everything's ahead of them. This is not a team where you look at some of the teams, whether you talk about Montreal, you talk about the Rangers, who had a big win over Nashville today, but they talk about, we have to win now. Yeah, the Leafs are winning now, and obviously by the fact that they signed Patrick Marleau during the offseason, they do think that they have a shot. But the bottom line is that the key players in this franchise, they haven't even scratched the surface of what their potential could possibly be.
You're right, and I guess that's one of the things that makes it that much more exciting. But yeah, it is a bit of a cautionary tale. I think not only for the Canadiens last year, it was each of the last two seasons before this one that they came flying out of the gates. I think they were like 13-1-1 2 years ago. I think they were 9-1 last year. It's not about how you start. It is about how you finish. And we're talking to Mike Zeisberger, who's with NHL.com at the Toronto-Ottawa game tonight that we'll have for you here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. Puck drop, probably about 30 minutes away, coverage in about 15. So elsewhere on the Leafs, and it has been fascinating to see, because I'm a big fan of William Nylander. And in fact, last year I picked him to win the Rookie of the Year, but then we know how that played out. A buddy of mine, a huge Leafs fan, picked Mitch Marner, and we made a bet. One of us took Marner, one of us took Nylander. We were both wrong, so we both lost the bet. But
you should have taken C none of the above.
Right, exactly. So I don't know. We've got to figure out how we're going to settle that. But meanwhile, it seems like, and Marner was the better player, I think, for most of last year. But Nylander came on strong at the end, and now Nylander is still flying high, while Marner spent some time on the fourth line. What's going on with him?
I think they just they saw a couple games where he had some defensive deficiencies, so they put him back there. It's not a punishment. This team plays the fourth line a fair bit, and the other thing is, you can look at Marner being on the fourth line, but he's also getting power play time. So he just has to tweak his game a little bit. As you mentioned, we forget sometimes. I mean, these guys are only in their second year. So there's going to be a few hiccups here as to moving forward. But I think you made a great point about Nylander in Montreal last weekend for that game. And it's always special when the Leafs and Habs play at the Bell. I actually thought everybody was talking about after the game, and rightly so, the two goals scored by Austin Matthews, including the game winner in overtime. But I thought William Nylander was the best Leaf for the most part for the whole game. He set up the winner in overtime. There were shifts in that game where I got to get this through my head. William Nylander. Yeah. Michael is the dad. William is wait till his brother starts playing regularly for Buffalo. But no, there were shifts where during the cycle, they couldn't get the puck off. And, I think it's very rare that you see a lot like last year, if you think about it. The line that they had, Zach Hyman, William Nylander, see, I got it right that time. And, those guys and Austin Matthews, those guys were all rookies. So this year, that was the one line that Mike Babcock came to training camp and said, you know what, that's the line I want to keep intact. So these are all second-year guys, and they still seem to have chemistry with each other. So, it goes back to the point that we made earlier. I mean, this was a team a year ago that, you start talking about Zaitsev, start talking about Connor Brown, we can go down the list. This was a team last year that a lot of nights had 7 or 8 rookies in it. And so as well as they're doing right now, I think the progress that you've seen in this team through, I don't know, what would it be now, 90 games since all these guys came into the National Hockey League? The progress has been pretty pretty significant. And I think, yes, you say the players have developed a lot, but I think you have to give a lot of credit to Mike Babcock and his coaching staff as well.
Yeah, it's true. And not an easy thing to do, to have that many rookies in a team and to actually get into the playoffs and make a series of it with Washington. It was amazing, but at the same time, you don't want to rest on your laurels too much. It seemed like going into the season, one of the question marks for this team was the blue line, at least for some people. And Ron Hainsey comes in and people are like, wow, really? Ron Hainsey, has he still got it? Well, apparently he does. I mean, he and Morgan Riley have been statistically one of the best defensive pairings in the National Hockey League this year.
Yeah. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There is a little bit of smoke and mirrors to their blue line, but when you look at all the teams in the National Hockey League right now, Connor, I mean, do we see any superpowers anymore? I mean, you can look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they have warts on their team. Tampa Bay, who I picked at the beginning of the season to win the Stanley Cup, I mean, they're not infallible. So every team seems to have weaknesses. I still think that the Leafs have enough depth that maybe down the road somewhere they'll make a deal to try to augment their defense core. I thought the best game that they played all season was Tuesday when they shut out the Washington Capitals 2-0, because maybe you didn't see the offensive flair that we have seen in other games, but they played a great game defensively. And I think that in Mike Babcock's scheme of things and his blueprint for this team, because it is such a young team, that's the one game tape that he can take and play over and over again to the guys when they start getting a little loosey-goosey and say, look, you know what? You know all those things we do in practice about tightening the defense? Here's an example that you guys can do it and you can be successful at it.
It's true, though, isn't it? It's all well and good to win an 8-5 game against the New York Rangers, but you're going to need to win those tight-checking, low-scoring games against teams like Washington, and they got to show that they can do that, and so far, mission accomplished.
Well, yeah, but the one thing, and I think, it's been fascinating. I was talking with a few scouts during the week at one of the games at the Air Canada Center, and it's interesting the way that the game has changed in the last couple of years. In that younger and faster seems to be the norm now. I mean, I don't know if you've had a chance to see the New Jersey Devils live yet, but they were in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. They're the only team that have beaten the Leafs so far this season, and those guys were so fast. I mean, you know who Taylor Hall is, and you know who Nico Hischier is. But, you're looking at Jesper Bratt and guys like that, and you're looking on their roster going, who are these kids? And look how fast they are. And in fact, Guy Boucher, the coach of the Ottawa Senators, whose team lost in overtime to the Devils on Thursday night, he was saying that some of his players during the game Thursday night were coming back to the bench going like, man, this team is fast. And as Boucher said, hey, I told the guys they were fast because we've been watching video of them all week. Huh. But you know what? The players never really realized it until they were on the ice against them. And that just, to me, shows when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, when you look at what the New Jersey Devils are building right now, if you draft the proper way, and we've been saying this for years, but younger, faster, instead of drafting for position or for need, you just draft the most talented players available. I don't think it takes a franchise to turn around as much time to turn things around as it used to, because, look at how many kids, 19, 20, 21 are in the league as compared to maybe 5-10 years ago.
You're right. And this kid Bratt's a crazy story too. I mean, this was a guy who he was not considered to be much even in Sweden. He was sort of flying under the radar, and he had a crazy offseason and just showed up to camp like a beast. And he took the decision out of their hands. The Devils, that Sens Devils game, I watched it the other night. I haven't seen them live, but watching that game on TV, that was a highly entertaining game between the Devils and the Senators, who are supposed to be the two most boring teams in the league. It's a nice thing. It's been a fun sort of little storyline here, and there's a bunch of guys. You're right. I'm watching. I'm like, who are these guys? So
it's like, I mean, in both of our lifetimes.
Got a break.
You know, in the early 2000s, I can remember that the Devils and the Senators played each other. I think it was the year that the Devils beat the Sens in the Eastern Final, and then faced Anaheim in the Stanley Cup Final. But that you know what? That may have been like water skiing on skates. Okay, there was clutching, there was grabbing. I mean, if one team scored 2 goals, it was an offensive outburst. You know, those Senators Devils games have come a long way from the dark ages, which were only about 15 years ago.
It's a nice thing. I'll take it. I used to avoid Devils games like the plague, and now they're must-see
Yeah.
TV. All right. Hey, Zeiss, I wish we had more time. I love talking hockey with you, man. Cheers. Have a good one.
Anytime. And listen, thank you very much for having me on, and have a great Saturday.
That is Mike Zeisberger with NHL.com. He's at the rink. The Leafs and the Senators coming up next. We'll be back to wrap things up and look at tonight's games right after this. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com and Facebook Live and Periscope and other places too. All right, so I got 3 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello. Last segment of the show, and it's not going to be a long one. It's Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio, streaming live as well at hockeyprimetime.com. My name is Conor McKenna. Laura Samba is here. She's the producer of the show. I am the host of the program. Laura, how you doing?
I'm good. I learned a lot on this show.
Really?
Yeah, I did.
Like
I
what?
learned a lot about the Dallas Stars. I had not been paying attention to the Dallas Stars this season yet. Although I did know they were doing a lot better out of the gate than last year.
They're not that good. They're 4-3.
Right,
You know?
but
like,
I
don't
mean-
plan the parade or anything.
I also, like, your power rankings were really surprising because I think before the season started, there were a few teams that would have been in
minutes.
opposite direction. Like, you know, like some of the positive ones would have been in the negative category. I believe, like, New Jersey, like we're gonna get a text about the New Jersey one, but I
Whoa.
thought they would be a lot lower.
Oh, who would have thought the Devils or the Kings would be
Up
power
there, exactly,
ranking
yeah, the
eligible
Kings.
teams? Yeah.
You know, like, I didn't expect them to do well at all. And then, New York, Montreal, Minnesota, I did not expect them to be at the bottom.
You said that Minnesota almost like you're from Minnesota. Minnesota. Hey, we're from Minnesota. All right, Buffalo and Boston tonight. The Sabres better figure this thing out and figure it out soon because it has been a catastrophe. Anton Hudobin goes again. Nothing like see a beat writer in Boston trying to manufacture a goaltending controversy there. Are you kidding me? They got Tuukka Rask. He's making $7 million a year. He's Tuukka Rask. There's no controversy, whatever Hudobin does. Yeah, Boston-Buffalo should be a good game tonight. Buffalo has got to figure this thing out. But coming up next year, we've got the Battle of Ontario. This is must-see TV. Every time the Leafs play, it seems like it's really fun. And we get to see Erik Karlsson play tonight. Did you see him against the Devils the other day? 3 assists. Just making unbelievable plays on both sides of the puck. I said it the other night. At least one time per period, Erik Karlsson does something absolutely mind-boggling, something unthinkable. For me, and I think for a lot of people out there, definitely one of the top 3 players in the National Hockey League. And when he's out there, he's the best defenseman as far as I'm concerned. So that's it for us.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Laura Saba. Thank you to all of our guests today, including Steve Karp, Greg Wyshynski, Sean Shapiro, James Naveau, and last but not least, Mike Zeisberger. Thank you for hanging out with us. Enjoy the games tonight. We'll talk to you again next week. Please check out our podcast page at hockeyprimetime.com.